Hello everyone, thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses EU leaders at a security summit on Ukraine. US and Russian officials set to meet again for talks in Saudi Arabia on Monday. Plus, Finland named world's happiest country for the 8th successive year. Let's begin the world today. We'll start off in Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on Russia to stop making unnecessary demands to drag out the war. He was addressing EU leaders at their summit today. He urged the world to keep up the pressure on President Putin because one moment they give their word and a few hours later it means absolutely nothing. Zelensky also says sanctions against Moscow must stay in place until Russia starts withdrawing from our land and fully compensates for the damage caused by its aggression. He says nothing has changed as Russia continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, despite Moscow agreeing to yesterday to stop such attacks. European leaders have been meeting in Brussels to decide their defense strategy and bolstering security measures for Ukraine. It comes as Ukrainian forces have lost ground in Kursk region, but are not encircled by Russian forces, according to a report on Reuters. That report, which cites 3 US and European officials familiar with intelligence assessments, runs contrary to recent comments by US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump has claimed that Ukrainian troops are surrounded in the region, while Putin has said Ukraine's military was cut off and would need to surrender. Zelensky called Putin's comments about the region disinformation in a social media post yesterday. Just last week, Putin claimed Russia was in control of Kursk, while Ukraine hinted its troops are pulling back. Meanwhile, the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has referred to his unwavering support for Ukraine during the Prime Minister's questions to the House of Commons on Wednesday. He did admit, though, the 2 MPs that using frozen Russian assets to do so is complicated. The UK has confirmed it would continue to supply military equipment to Kyiv.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I spoke to President Zelensky to discuss progress that President Trump had made with Russia towards a ceasefire, and I took the opportunity to reaffirm our unwavering support to the people of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply concerned about the resumption of Israeli military action in Gaza. The images of parents carrying their children, young children, to hospitals have emerged over the last few days are truly shocking, alongside the sheer number of people who've been killed. And we will do all that we can to ensure the resumption of the ceasefire, to get the remaining hostages out and to get aid that's desperately needed in.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Meanwhile, US and Russian officials are set to meet for another round of talks next Monday in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. This was made known by the Russian foreign policy aide, Yuri Ushakov. He says Russia will reportedly be represented by Senator Grigory Karasin, who heads the Russian Senate's International Affairs Committee, and Sergei Beseda, an advisor to the director of Russia's FSB Domestic Security Service. Both men will reportedly lead a team of Russian experts. The US team has also been agreed and will be announced by the American side. Well, following his phone call with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday and on social media platform Truth Social, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has detailed ownership of Ukraine's power sector, with Trump saying the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. President Zelensky confirms the topic of power plants was raised during his call with President Trump.
On another important matter, yesterday, President Trump and President Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Both leaders agreed this conflict needs to end with a lasting peace and also stressed the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia. President Trump also spoke with President Zelensky this morning to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their needs and requests. As President Trump has said repeatedly, the precious lives and money that both Ukraine and Russia have been spending in this war would be better spent on the needs of their people. This terrible conflict would have never started with President Trump in charge, but he's determined to end it once and for all. President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure. President Zelensky also thanked President Trump for continuing to push humanitarian concerns, including the exchange of prisoners of war. He noted they had just had a successful exchange and thanked the president for his leadership on that. President Trump also asked President Zelensky about the children who had gone missing from Ukraine during the war, including the ones that had been abducted. And President Trump promised to work closely with both parties to help make sure those children were returned home. They agreed all parties must continue the effort to make a ceasefire work. The presidents noted the positive work of their advisors and representatives, especially Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Special Envoy Kellogg, and others. The presidents instructed their teams to move ahead with the technical issues related to implementing and broadening the partial ceasefire. The presidents instructed their advisors and representatives to carry out this work as quickly as possible. The presidents emphasized that in further meetings, the teams can agree on all necessary aspects of advancing toward lasting peace and security.
And we're getting more information on the upcoming talks between U.S. and Russian officials set to hold on Monday. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce addressed the issue just a while ago. She noted that President Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky will also be holding discussions after the exchange with Putin, with Trump describing the phone call to be a telephone call, adding that both Washington and Kyiv are committed to working closely to bring a real end to the war.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. As Secretary Rubio made clear yesterday, Venezuela is obligated to accept its repatriated citizens from the United States. This is not an issue for debate or negotiation, nor does it merit any reward. Unless the Maduro regime accepts a consistent flow of deportation flights, without further excuses or delays, the U.S. will impose new, severe, and escalating sanctions. As President Trump made clear in his proclamation, TDA is closely aligned with, and indeed has infiltrated the Maduro regime. Maduro maintains close ties to regime-sponsored narco-terrorists. The Maduro regime must accept back all Venezuelan aliens deported by the United States, especially their murderers, rapists, criminals, human traffickers, and other illegally present criminals in the United States. End of discussion.
We do apologize. Tammy Bruce was supposed to be talking about President Zelensky's conversation with the U.S. President Donald Trump. Well, joining us now is the head of Department of History and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos, Professor David Awurawo. He joins us from here in Lagos. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
How confident are you, Professor, that these talks, the one that's been held by the EU regarding peace in Ukraine, the one holding in London, as well as the upcoming talks with Presidents Trump, Zelensky, and Vladimir Putin, will eventually lead to peace in Ukraine?
No. It won't lead to peace in Ukraine. Peace in Ukraine will come, but not now. Not with these issues on the ground and the approach to the talks. Just to give you a simple example, 2 days ago, Trump spoke with Putin, and the agreement was that they would cease attacks on oil facilities and the rest. Just that night, of course, yesterday up to this morning, Russia stepped up attacks on Ukraine, as you could see from all the reports you have presented. the issues in the Russia-Ukraine war are complicated, and they are of the zero-sum typology. And when you have this kind of scenario, it is not this approach to negotiations and agreement that will bring them to an end. Something more comprehensive, something that will reflect more altruism on the part of the negotiators and fairness is what will bring lasting peace. So all of these things can lay the foundation for lasting peace, but they won't bring peace in the immediate.
That's pretty interesting. So no effects to these talks. But these talks are becoming more serious now, and that's because the U.S. is involved, or should I say because Donald Trump is involved, is the reason why the talks have become more intense. It was just during the week that the UK Prime Minister decided to have another summit on peace. We've seen like about 3 summits already holding in the last 2 weeks. There have been talks between the U.S. and the Russian presidents. There's been talks between the Ukrainian president with his other European counterparts, and there have been talks between the U.S. president and the Russian president. So why do you think there is an intensity? Is it because of how long the war has lasted, or is this because, you know, these countries are scrambling for who gets the glory at the end of the day, who is able to broker peace in Ukraine?
A couple of things. One of them is the point you just made. The war has dragged on for a long time. It is reaching a stage of stalemate. When countries fight for a long time, at some point, they tend to want to agree positions that they didn't agree or they couldn't have agreed when the war started. That's one. The second is the coming of Trump. The coming of Trump potentially would drastically reduce the support that Ukraine has got or Ukraine is getting. And that support is critical to Ukraine's continuation of the war with Russia. If Ukraine were to be left to fight Russia on its own, the war will have ended in a few weeks. And so the realization that that help will no longer come as previously is central. Of course, the British Prime Minister too just came in. He too wants to play a part in attempts and efforts to end the war. So it's a combination of factors and forces, and not one singular cause, that has led to a flurry of meetings, activities in Saudi Arabia, in the United States, in London, and elsewhere. In fact, one just heard, a few minutes ago, where Zelensky spoke in Norway. And his comments confirm my earlier position that these talks will not bring the war to an end now. For instance, he stated clearly that the nuclear plants in Ukraine belong to Ukraine. And that is contrary to Rubio's suggestion that they will be in a better position to help to manage those assets. He also says that the Crimea belongs to Ukraine. And that is a contentious issue in the negotiations. So this flurry of activities could lay the foundation for serious talks that will end the war. But I don't think that they will bring the war to an end in the immediate.
Do you think the U.S. is overreaching, when President Trump tells President Zelensky that the U.S. will be able to manage Ukraine's energy facilities? I mean, they'd also wanted a deal with Ukraine regarding its earth minerals, which Zelensky eventually did not sign. One of the reasons why President Trump was upset with him, at the White House the last time he visited. Do you think the U.S. is overreaching here when it now talks about Ukraine's energy infrastructure?
Certainly. And that is another layer added to the complications. Trump has been talking about the benefits that the United States will gain, even personal benefits. For instance, the White House spokesperson that spoke a couple of days ago said, if Trump were president when the war started in 2022, the war would not have started. I mean, just some glory for Trump. But again, the talks that Trump had with Putin, we have seen the aftermath. He didn't bring the peace that they were boasting about. And of course, Trump is trying to get the U.S. to gain maximally from the war. And that is even complicating attempts to secure a ceasefire. That's another layer in the complications. And of course, it adds to why I said that peace will not come in the immediate. A couple of other things will need to happen for genuine peace to come. And of course, both sides will need to grant concessions. They haven't granted concessions enough. Of course, see the comments of Zelensky just less than an hour ago in Norway, and see the position of Putin on the war. That first, he gave one condition. He said arms flow to Ukraine has to be halted as one precondition to having a ceasefire. So you can see that everything is up in the air. It's still so complicated. And as I said before, when things happen like this and there will be zero-sum typology, they are always very intricate and difficult to resolve.
Yes, and we're seeing that the U.S. President Donald Trump's 24 hours to end the war in Ukraine turn into weeks and possibly months. So the U.S. presented Russia with a ceasefire plan. Russia agreed in words, agreed verbally, but I mean, in practice, it didn't. It violated the ceasefire just hours after with those 150 drone strikes on Ukraine. Is it because the ceasefire plan was not on his terms? This was not a plan formulated by Russia. That is the reason why the Russian government has rejected it, has rejected it in action, not in words, but in action. And the reason why they feel no responsibility to fulfill whatever they have agreed to, either with the United States or with the rest of the world.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons. They are not on Russian terms. That is one of the reasons. The other reasons, Russia still wants to show that it has the upper hand in the war, and it also wants to use that as a bargaining chip, so that when discussions are held moving forward, it will be able to gain maximally from whatever they arrive at. All of this combination of factors and forces will have influenced Putin to even increase, not reduce, to increase attacks on Ukraine, in the past 2 days or so. Usually when negotiations are going on like this, some countries want to now attack and then be in a commanding position. Only when that happens that they are able to gain much, for their side, whatever discussions, are held thereafter. So what Putin is doing or has done is consistent with what regularly happens when wars, are fought. He's probably saying that all of these efforts will bring an end to the war at some point. And for Russia to gain maximally from the discussions, it has to be in a position of strength. That will also have been a factor in why Putin is doing what it is doing. But like I said before, a whole lot will still need to be done. Both sides will still need to shift grants. One phone call, 2 phone calls won't end it. A very comprehensive negotiation will have to take place. And of course, move on the background, trying to tell each side of the need to shift grants to be able to end the war so that they can move on with their lives. All of these things will be important and necessary to eventually bring the war to an end. Until that is done, the war, unfortunately, will continue.
The Coalition of the Willing, that's the group of nations that have tasked themselves with achieving peace in Ukraine, formed by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, says that they're preparing for a possible peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Do you think this force should also be monitoring observance of the ceasefire? Because that was also one of the conditions that the Russian president mentioned in his conversation with Donald Trump.
Yes, in fact, that would be the key activity. Usually when peacekeeping forces are deployed, they have a mandate. And this one will be, the focus will normally be to ensure that whatever ceasefire is agreed to, the terms are implemented. That would be the key function of the peacekeeping force if and when it is deployed. So it's just in line. But safety of the peacekeepers and cooperation of the actors with the peacekeepers, because the extent to which the actors, keep with the terms of a ceasefire is directly proportional to how effective a peacekeeping force will be. So the actors will still be very key. What they do or fail to do will be key to the success of the peacekeeping force. But of course, like you said, like the points we have been making, the peacekeeping force, the main focus will be to ensure that the terms of whatever ceasefire is agreed to are maintained, and that both parts agree and keep to those terms. It is when those terms are kept, of course, that's when stability will begin to take place, and of course, the war will then gradually come to an end. Of course, that will be a key contribution of the Europeans to ending this war between Russia and Ukraine.
But would the Russian government recognize and acknowledge this peacekeeping force? Let's not forget that the European Union has several sanctions imposed on Russia, and right now relations between the two are very, very frayed.
Yes, that will be the tricky part. On the Ukrainian side, I imagine that there will be more problem. But on the Russian side, it will be complicated. I'm sure the peacekeepers too will be conscious of this. And of course, from time to time, there will also be diplomatic intervention efforts to get the Russians to ensure that whatever agreement they reach, they keep their own part of the agreement, so that both the agreement and, of course, the peacekeepers will be successful in their activities. And, of course, that is the only way that the war can then effectively come to an end. But like I said before, concessions are required extensively on both sides. We haven't seen that yet. When that begins to happen, whatever peacekeeping force comes in will be successful, because both sides will then be able to, work according to what they have agreed to. But the Russian side will be more complicated, and we hope that reason will prevail to allow the peacekeepers to do their work, and of course help to bring the war to an end.
Indeed, Professor David Awura, we appreciate your thoughts and analysis on the program today.
Thanks so very much for having me.
The U.S. government has defunded one program, left another, that both document alleged Russian war crimes in Ukraine. The Trump administration cut funding for Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab, which had detailed the mass deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. It has also withdrawn from a multinational group meant to investigate the leaders responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including President Vladimir Putin. These moves come after Trump spoke with Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to negotiate a ceasefire in Ukraine, breaking with the previous U.S. administration's approach to try and hold Putin responsible for the Russian invasion. Coming up after the break on The World Today. Iran releases a French tourist detained for more than 2 years. Stay with us. Welcome back. Yemen's rebel Houthi group says it's fired a missile at Israel, which was intercepted. The ballistic missile was fired towards Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. According to the group's military spokesperson in a televised statement, sirens sounded in several areas of Israel, according to Israeli Defense Forces, but no injuries have been reported, and the IDF says a missile was stopped before entering Israel. Meanwhile, Gaza's Hamas-run civil defense agency said Israeli strikes earlier today have killed at least 10 people. Israel has extended its ground operations in Gaza after launching a wave of airstrikes that the Hamas-run health ministry says killed more than 430 people in 2 days. Meanwhile, the U.S. president has threatened Yemeni Houthi rebels, saying they'll be completely annihilated as American airstrikes pound locations under their control, while further pressuring the group's main benefactor, Iran. Strikes hit Sana'a, Yemen's rebel-held capital, as well as their stronghold of Sadr in the country's northwest Wednesday night. According to local news media, it aired footage showing firefighters battling a blaze in Sana'a and damaged at what it described as a sheep farm in Al Jof. It also said strikes happened overnight on Tuesday, though the U.S. military has not offered a breakdown of places targeted since its airstrike campaign began. The first strikes this weekend killed at least 53 people, including children, and it wounded others. As the strikes hit, President Trump wrote on his Truth Social website that tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians. To Gaza now, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says residents in Gaza need to leave the area, warning that the next phase of military operations will be much more difficult. That announcement comes as Israel resumes its offensive in Gaza 58 days after a ceasefire agreement with Hamas took effect. In a video address on Wednesday, Katz said residents of Gaza, this is a final warning. The first Sinwar destroyed Gaza and the second Sinwar will destroy it completely. The airstrike on Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What follows will be much more difficult and you will pay the full price. It was referring to Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Katz says Israel is preparing to evacuate civilians from combat zones and emphasized that the continuation of military operations is tied to the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas, saying that if all Israeli hostages are not released and Hamas is not expelled from Gaza, Israel will act with forces you have not yet known. Let's bring a reserve officer in the IDF spokesperson's unit, Rachel Lester. She joins us now. Rachel, we appreciate your joining us on the program today.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I'd like to get your thoughts on, how you feel about those airstrikes, which have been condemned by a number of countries. We're seeing the protests everywhere, in Madrid, in Paris, in Germany, and so on, because a number of civilians are being killed by these Israeli airstrikes. In the past few days, 400 deaths in a day. That's much more than were killed on that unfortunate day by Hamas militants on the Israeli civilians, which started off this whole war with Gaza.
Okay, let me address a couple of things. Firstly, we have no idea how many civilians have been killed in Gaza because Hamas's numbers are not trustworthy in any way. We all have known from the beginning of the war that it takes way more than one day to count dead civilians or injured civilians. So any number that Hamas has come out with so far cannot be trusted at all. As far as the airstrikes that so many countries are protesting, I want to put it in the context of how did we get here? Because we've had a ceasefire for 2 months that saw Israel releasing over 1,000 Palestinian terrorists for just 33 Israeli hostages, both alive and dead. And the ceasefire was supposed to move on to a second phase, but diplomacy failed. Hamas repeatedly refused to release the rest of the Israeli hostages, and Hamas also rejected every single proposal that they received from the American negotiators. So Hamas made clear that they would rather drag Gaza and all of the civilians that includes into a war zone, endangering all of the lives of the people that they're in charge of, rather than simply free the last 59 hostages. It could have been so simple. And we know that the hostages are being tortured and starved in underground tunnels or forced to be slaves from the hostages that have been released so far. Israel cannot and should not be expected to continue endlessly trying to negotiate after Hamas has made their priorities clear so many times. We had no choice but to go back to the war that Hamas has forced us into. Additionally, the fact that Hamas fired rockets into central Israel today only highlights the fact that they have been using every day of the ceasefire to recruit more members and build more weapons. It would be absolutely insane to let the threat of another October 7th start to grow again on our border. So I think Israel is more than justified in responding to Hamas's complete lack of participation in the peace process with rockets and missiles.
Defense Minister Israel Katz says residents of Gaza need to leave because they will most likely experience more attacks from the Israeli Defense Forces. It says Israel will act with forces you have not yet known. He's asking those who live in Gaza to leave. But wouldn't you need a ceasefire in order to allow for this civilian passage, at least out of Gaza? And then how are you so sure that the people who are leaving Gaza are innocent civilians and not Hamas members?
The beginning of the war, the first several months, included evacuations from the north to the south and then from within the south to other parts of southern Gaza every single day without a ceasefire. It's very clear that we give Gaza notice before we strike in a specific area. It's all over social media and on TV there, and we can expect that they have reasonable ways to get around that don't include a ceasefire needing to be in effect. And regardless, we don't have the choice to continue a ceasefire because Hamas rejected every single ceasefire proposal. It's really not up to us at this point.
Some aid organizations are claiming that, their staff have been hit. The UN did report that at least 2 of its staff had been killed in those Israeli airstrikes. And then you have more people in need of aid in Gaza. There's no aid coming in. There's no one leaving Gaza at the moment. Does Israel consider the humanity of the situation at hand?
I just want to clarify that the UN workers that were tragically killed this week were not killed by the IDF. The IDF did an investigation and put out a statement that it was not an IDF airstrike that killed them. As far as the humanity of the situation, of course, every single thing Israel does is to try to preserve as much humanity as possible. Why else would we be telling Gazan civilians to evacuate before every single airstrike? We want to minimize as many civilian casualties as humanly possible, and it's Hamas's fault that we're in this situation, that we have to be striking them at all. The second part of the ceasefire deal could have been agreed upon if Hamas would just be willing to step down from power and let a peaceful organization take over, and they simply won't. They are putting Gazan civilian lives in danger every single day by refusing to meet the terms of the second phase of the ceasefire deal. So I think instead of asking if Israel cares about the humanity of the situation, you need to be asking, why doesn't anyone care that Hamas doesn't care about the humanity of the situation?
Well, that's because a lot of groups think that Israel is perpetrating genocide in Gaza, and many of those protests, the protesters who are protesting Israel's airstrikes say that they're killing innocent civilians. Do you think these people are being influenced by Hamas propaganda? They probably do not understand the situation on the ground. And is there a way to verify what really is going on the ground, seeing that even journalists like myself and my colleagues in the Middle East are also restricted from certain parts of Gaza to actually determine what is true and what is not?
I can tell you that there's not a simple way to know what's going on the ground, and journalists are being restricted for their own safety because in a war, we cannot guarantee journalists' safety. As far as the claim of genocide, it's simple slander because we are in a war that we didn't start and we don't want to be in, and we wouldn't be in if Hamas would simply accept the ceasefire agreements that they've been offered over and over and over. I think that Israel's doing whatever is necessary to continue degrading Hamas's military capabilities and not let them start another October 7th, because that's what they're trying to do. I mean, we had rockets in Israel today. How could we let them continue to rearm and recruit new members while they're, while Israel is sitting on the other side of the border right here?
What do you say to those who think that Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent actions are being egged on by the U.S. President Donald Trump, someone he respects?
I think that it's not my place to comment on the relationship between any other country and Israel, but I think that Netanyahu is doing what he feels is the best case scenario for Israel. And after, again, 2 months of negotiations, we've been backed into this corner. And I'm thankful that we do have U.S. support at this moment.
Rachel, thank you again for speaking with us on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
Palestinians in Gaza have expressed their fears over the possible resumption of the war and escalation in the already dire humanitarian conditions that they're enduring amidst the destruction of their homes caused by the war. They also voiced their concerns about being forcibly displaced to southern Gaza amid severe economic hardship, calling on the international community to urgently intervene and alleviate their suffering.
The situation in the Gaza Strip remains very volatile and complicated, with the strikes resuming in the early hours of the morning yesterday and some continuing into the night last night. We've of course received reports, horrifying reports, of hundreds of people being killed and injured, including many children. We're also receiving reports of people being displaced, including as a result of the evacuation orders that were issued yesterday. This, of course, comes on top of an already very complicated situation in which the crossings for the entry of cargo and humanitarian assistance have been closed for more than 2 weeks.
An apparent Israeli airstrike killed 6 international aid workers with the World Central Kitchen and their Palestinian driver, according to the charity. It's a potentially major setback for efforts in delivering aid by sea to Gaza, where Israel's offensive against Hamas has pushed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the brink of starvation.
Israel's most recent blockade of Gaza has passed 2 weeks, deepening the humanitarian crisis in the Strip and forcing desperately needed community kitchens and bakeries to shut down. The operator of 10 charity food kitchens and other humanitarian services in the Gaza Strip say only 2 food distribution centers are now open after Israel's blockade of all humanitarian goods. With Ramadan in full swing, the aid halt puts more pressure on the charity kitchens, a lifeline for Gaza residents.
We are in the holy month of Ramadan with our team of 15 to 14 women and men, plus myself. We prepare pastries, Palestinian moussaka, and serve it with cheese, boiled eggs, and za'atar thyme as accompaniments. We also make soups daily, as well as Palestinian maftul, samakia, and romaniya. We can say these are the more challenging dishes to prepare.
Before Israel imposed the blockade, the kitchens were able to provide food for about 40,000 people in central Gaza's Deir al-Balah, but now only 10,000 Palestinians are receiving meals. Fatan highlights the challenges they face now that hostilities seem to have resumed.
With the crossings closed, we face many challenges. Today, we can buy a product and the next day it's either gone from the markets or available but at double the price. Water is hard to come by and we even have to do the cleaning ourselves since there are no cleaning workers anymore.
Gazan officials say more than 10,000 aid trucks have been blocked from entering Gaza.
The demand is very intense. I can tell you that people are on the brink of starvation. God knows we're heading back to famine. The demand is overwhelming. We thought about taking Fridays off, but people come to us and say, please, don't stop your service. We rely entirely on the kitchen. The main meal for Ramadan iftar comes from your kitchen, and then they bring smaller items to complement it.
The situation is extremely difficult. Food supplies are scarce in the markets, and we rely on charity kitchens like this one to get by. Of course, there's no money in the country, no work, and there are signs of a famine looming. If the crossings aren't opened within a day or two, we will face real famine.
The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, calls the situation urgent and demands Israel restore access to water and electricity to prevent further loss of life in the enclave, which has been devastated by 18 months of Israel bombing and siege. Israel made the decision to stop aid going into Gaza after Hamas rejected an Israeli request to extend the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire. The militant group said it would only release the remaining Israeli hostages under the terms of the already agreed upon phased deal, and not as per the plan put forward by U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, which would see the first phase of the ceasefire deal continue through Ramadan and Passover, or until 20 April.
We're off on another short break on The World Today. Still ahead. Well, he's called the Indian werewolf. Madhya Pradesh sets a Guinness World Record. Stay with us.
There are 1,001 ways to start your day.
Whether you're in Lagos, Nigeria,
in London or anywhere in the world,
or online.
We all want a perfect start to our day, don't we?
7 a.m. Every weekday, we bring you a better way to start your day.
Hello, and a warm welcome to our house. I'm Melinda Kimani. Coming up on today's episode of the program.
Life is a stage. A bold canvas. Splash some paint on it. String some rhymes while at it. Then enjoy it on Art House. We see life in beautiful curves, crafts, colours, and most exciting forms. Join us as we savour intriguing sights and sounds at these times. Art House, life is art.
Welcome back. 4 Canadians have been executed in China on drug-related charges early this year. According to Canadian authorities, all of them were dual citizens and their identities have been withheld. According to the Foreign Minister Melanie Joly, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Canada reportedly urged Ottawa to stop making irresponsible remarks as pundits fear a further downturn in relations between the countries after years of strain. China's foreign ministry said earlier today it acted in accordance with the law, while the embassy said there was solid and sufficient evidence for their crimes. Beijing had fully guaranteed the rights and interests of the Canadian nationals concerned, according to the embassy, urging Canada to respect China's judicial sovereignty. China does not recognize dual citizenship and takes a tough stance on drug crimes. However, it's rare for the death penalty to be carried out on foreigners. In the meantime, Iran has released a French tourist detained by authorities for more than 2 years. He is also returned to France. President Emmanuel Macron wrote on social media platform X that Oliver Grondeau, 34 years old, is free and with his family, adding that he shares Mr. Grondeau's family's immense happiness and relief. Mr. Grondeau was arrested in southern Iran in October of 2022. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for conspiracy against the Islamic Republic. His family always denied the charges. The Iranian regime has arrested many tourists and dual nationals in recent years, mostly on spying and national security charges. Here in Africa, the M23 rebels are pushing further east in the Democratic Republic of Congo, attacking another town, advancing into the outskirts of Walikale, just 1 day after the presidents of Congo and Rwanda called for an immediate ceasefire. Residents reported hearing gunfire near Walikale's Nyabangi neighborhood as rebels were engaged in combat with both Congolese soldiers and pro-government militia after launching a surprise attack on an army position just outside the town. Walikale, a town with a population of around 15,000, located in a mineral-rich region, marks the furthest westward point in the M23 rebels have reached during their rapid offensive this year. The attack took place even as the presidents of Congo and neighboring Rwanda met on Tuesday in Qatar for their first direct talks, calling for an immediate ceasefire in the restive region. The M23 is one of about 100 armed groups that have been vying for a foothold in mineral-rich eastern Congo near the border with Rwanda, and a conflict that has created one of the world's most significant humanitarian crises. More than 7 million people, have been displaced. Meanwhile, South Africa's Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, has called for the Southern African region to strengthen its petroleum industry and position it where it rightfully belongs. Speaking as South Africa assumes the G20 presidency, Mr. Mantashe emphasized this sector must seize the opportunity to advance its policies and drive growth. He made the remarks at the 4th Annual Southern Africa Oil Conference 2025 underway at the Century City Conference Center in Cape Town.
Industry leaders are exploring strategies to unlock the region's petroleum potential while prioritizing sustainability. South Africa's Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, emphasizes that the Southern African region must strengthen its petroleum industry and position it where it rightfully belongs.
They were given the responsibility to elevate petroleum to where it belongs. And this conference is a very important element of that effort to elevate petroleum.
The CEO of Petroleum Agency South Africa, Dr. Bongani Saidini, provides insights into the current state of South Africa's oil and gas industry and highlights key investment opportunities in the sector.
South Africa is potentially endowed in oil and gas. As the Petroleum Agency, SA, we estimate that this country contains some 27 billion barrels and 60 TCF in prospective oil and gas resources.
It's important that we look at developing our people, products, oil and gas, but also to have a purpose-driven approach.
Executive Chairman of African Energy Chamber, NJ Ayuk, thinks that Africa is not making progress in its refining capabilities.
No, we're not. I think we need to invest almost $16 billion in refurbishing African refineries. That's just refurbishing African refineries. But also we need to really take off African energy infrastructure. A lot of our infrastructure is built to export. We've not built pipelines to distribute natural gas across Africa. We've not built LNG receiving terminals so that we can trade LNG within Africa. I know in countries like Nigeria, you have Greenville Energy with its virtual pipelines that is moving LNG across Nigeria, but we need to be able to create virtual pipelines, get LNG being moved across the African continent.
Eastern Cape Premier Oscar Mabuyane reinforced Minister Gwede Mandashe's message, highlighting South Africa's G20 presidency as a key opportunity to advance the petroleum sector.
G20 summit is an unprecedented opportunity for South Africa as well as the continent. As you know, that it's for the first time the continent to host that. So it's something that we should be building on. As I've said, we are a developing country. We will be interacting with other developing countries and developed countries. So it creates a big market for us, for our products, for SMMEs to grow.
With South Africa at the helm of the G20 presidency, the call for advancement and investment in the sector remains strong. But how will these discussions shape the future of oil and gas in the Southern Africa region? That remains to be seen. From Cape Town, South Africa, Innocent Simos, Channels Television News.
And Finland has been ranked the world's happiest country for the 8th successive year, with experts citing access to nature and a strong welfare system as factors. It comes ahead of 3 other Nordic countries in this year's UN-sponsored World Happiness Report, while Latin America's Costa Rica and Mexico entered the top 10 for the first time. Both the UK and the US slipped down the list to 23rd and 24th respectively, the lowest ever position for the latter. The study also found strangers are about twice as kind as people think. It measured trust in strangers by deliberately losing wallets, seeing how many were returned and comparing that to how many people thought would be handed in. So Finland, the happiest country in the world. And we're looking at 18-year-old Madhya Pradesh, who's been recognized by the Guinness World Records for having the hairiest face on the planet. Lalit Patida, who has hypertrichosis, a rare genetic condition often called werewolf syndrome, has an average of 202 hairs per square centimeter, covering over 95% of his face. Patida shares his daily life on social media, showing his confidence and determination to embrace his individuality. With 265,000 Instagram followers and 108,000 YouTube subscribers, Patida, not Madhya Pradesh, he's just from Madhya Pradesh, Patida has turned his unique appearance into a platform for self-acceptance and inspiration. He recently traveled to Milan to receive his Guinness World Record certificate. He shared his experience of life with a rare condition, saying he's gotten used to it.
जैसे कि मुझे यही अच्छे लगते हैं, इससे मेरी पहचान भी बन गई, मैं अलग दिखता हूँ लोगों से.
He is really unique. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.